So welcome everyone. My name is Corinna. I am a program manager with the Salzburg Global Center for Education Transformation. I'll be moderating and facilitating today's session. And I'm really excited to be here with an amazing group of colleagues and like-minded females. We're an all-women panel, which is really exciting. So before we dive into some of the really brilliant presentations and hopefully exploring the big question of why especially young people should continue to believe in democracy, I would like to tell you a little bit more about Salzburg Global Seminar and how this group came together. Salzburg Global Seminar is hosting today's session as part of this year's Learning Planet Festival. We're a small nonprofit based in Salzburg in Austria and in Washington, D.C. in the United States of America. Our mission is to challenge current and future leaders to shape a better world. And at the Salzburg Global Center for Education Transformation, we do that by organizing residential programs which span multiple days and bring together individuals from all walks of life. In November last year, we hosted a program called Civic and Civil Education, Identity, Belonging and Education in the 21st Century. And the lovely people who are going to be presenting during this session today all came to meet as part of this program. So during the program, one of the big questions that kept coming up was whether there was a correlation between the lack of agency that young people may be feeling all around the world and the skepticism towards civic education and the term democracy. And so for that reason, today's presentations will look at the role that power and colonialism has played in how civic education has been set up and designed, and how we can deconstruct those frameworks. So in today's session, we'll really be bridging a massive gap between research, policy, and practice. You'll hear from academics, you'll hear from leaders of nonprofits and NGOs, and you'll hear from teachers who are working and teaching civic education on a daily basis. The program that I was talking about would not have been possible without a brilliant consortium of partners, some of which I think are on the call. So a big shout out to ETS, the Ban Ki-moon Center, the Global Center for Pluralism, Mediocracy, San Jose de Las Vegas, the US Embassy in Vienna, and World's Largest Lesson. Last but not least, a big thank you to the Reckmeyer Family Fellowship, without which one of our presenters, Shireen, would not have been able to be with the program. So yeah, big thank you to all the partners. And now I am really excited to hand it over to our first speaker, Shireen Rashid, who is a professor for philosophy, education, and social justice with Long Island University. She is going to tell us a little bit more about the stage that democracy is currently in, and what that means, especially for young people. So over to you, Shireen. And I'm going to start sharing our presentation if all goes well. Give me 1 second.
Okay, so are we sharing the presentation? Okay, great, excellent. Yeah. So hi everyone, and thank you all for being here. And thank you, Corinna, for the introduction. And yes, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do this. I want to acknowledge the Reckmeyer Family Fellowship, through which I was fortunate enough to be part of the Salzburg Seminar on Civic Education and Citizenship, and meet this amazing group and some amazing other people in the group. And hopefully this is just the beginning of a work that we hope you all will be part of. So this came about as we started discussing what democracy is, because all our panelists are very varied. I'm based in US, American, but originally from Pakistan. I have colleagues from India, colleagues from Africa, Austria, So it's really interesting. So democracy in our discussion came out to mean different things to different people. So I'm going to start off with a quote by Anne Norton. And to quote her, her book on wild democracy, democracy is a commitment, a conviction, a principle, a star to steer by in an unmapped sea. It is not what we have or what we are. Perhaps at its best, what we long to be. So in her book, what Anne Norton sets out to do is come out with this capacious, anarchist, populist, and an energetic conception of democracy. And her view of democracy as a capacious and messy set of mutable ethics, rather than a collection of threatened institution norms and values, is in need of special defense. And Norton treats democracy as both a transcendental ideal and practical everyday habit. And that's what we're going to be exploring in this panel. So I'm going to just talk about several different points that are on the slide. First one is current landscape of democracy and its relationship to civic education. Of course, based in the US, I'm going to be talking about the US context, but it does apply, unfortunately or fortunately, to other aspects of the country as well, to the world as well. So Gurdia Berthan, in his research, elucidates that according to the Freedom House, and other analysis and matrix, democratic backsliding has become a global trend. Research suggests that young people are increasingly disengaged from political life. They're voting less, rejecting party memberships, and telling researchers that their country's leaders aren't working in their interests. But at the same time, young people remain engaged in civil life. They attend demonstrations, use the internet to make their voices heard, and are active outside the traditional political sphere, like in business, at school, and in religious communities. At a time when political rights and civil liberties are in decline, he asks us, why are youth so dissatisfied with democracy? And how can civic and democratic leaders bring them back into the fold? This is the question our panel is going to ask in their own case studies. And this is a question that I engaged with my brilliant undergraduate students who are on this Zoom right now. And they gave me some really good answers that I'm going to unpack in a few minutes that I have here. So according to the World Values Survey, the world's average youth, defined between 18 and 29, participates in national elections is 47.7%. The figure vary by country and region, with Latin America youth voting at relatively high rates, often reaching above 65% turnout, while youth in Europe and Africa voting tend to post turnout rates between 40 and 50%. Voter turnout in the US among the 18 to the 24 election, as we saw in the 2020 presidential election, was 48%, the lowest compared to all other age groups. Low youth electoral participation reflects apathy, mistrust, dissatisfaction with democratic processes. This is my own engagement with my own class and other students of that age group, and feeds into the democratic backsliding narrative. In addition to low electoral turnout for youth, studies reveal other complex challenges that may help explain global democratic backsliding. For one, youth satisfaction with democracy is declining around the globe, not only in absolute terms, but also relative to how older generation felt at the same stages in life. In older democracies, youth discontent is driven in large part by perception of economic exclusion, illustrated by high youth unemployment and widening economic inequality. In the emerging democracies of Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Global South, and Southern Europe, there is similar disappointment with democratic performance on issues important to young people, education, employment, and opportunity. Moreover, young people also feel excluded from important government decisions that affect their lives and future. The second point is, then how does this relate to the role of right-wing populism education and its relationship to democracies globally and the youth's relationship to that? Laws and policies silencing teachers and professors from discussing race, gender, sexual orientation, and or the history of colonization in their classroom prevent educators, at least now I'm talking about the US context, from contextualizing the history of racism in the US landscape, has only facilitated decline of youth engagement in democracy. Furthermore, as sociologist Victor Ray has noted, making laws outlining critical race theory confirms the point that racism is embedded in the law. Donald Trump first produced the idea of an executive order banning critical race theory when he was running for election. Effects of this ideological propaganda have had severe consequences across the country. One of them was the MacArthur Fellow and the writer of the New York Times 1619 Project, journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones, who was denied tenure at University of North Carolina. And right now, currently, Texas is banning the reading of African history. In 2021, a Texas school district told its officials that they cannot teach the Diary of Anna Frank. And if they had to keep books on the Holocaust in the classroom, they have to be offering opposing viewpoints in order to comply with the new state law. Let that sink in now for a minute. What that means for the young youth, of how history is being rewritten and voices are being suppressed. And 8 states, including Oklahoma, Tennessee, Iowa, New Hampshire, Arizona, and South Carolina, have passed legislation saying to the extent of what has to be taught, what cannot be taught, moving to a very, very oppressive ideology of how curriculum is even structured. Politicians in Montana and South Dakota have denounced teaching concepts associated with the history of US, the Holocaust or critical race theory. And Florida, Georgia, Utah, and 20 additional states have followed suit. So this is not just based specific to K-12 schooling. Educational policies in universities are now being restrictive. The latest of being, we've seen at least in the US, MIT, UPenn, and Harvard have been the latest examples of right-wing ideologies siding with limited free speech in the classroom by the presidents being fired. Yet, in light of all of the suppression of free speech that the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, is taking on behalf of these universities, we are noticing a real reunited sense of activism, youth, and radicalizing democracy within an intersectional framework outside the education spaces. We are seeing that with the youth. It started with the Black Lives Matter movement. It started with the restrictive gun laws. It's now and the climate change, and now on college campuses for a ceasefire and the genocide of Palestine in Gaza. So what this is telling us is activism is going on, but just not in the spaces we think it should be happening in. What's happening is that students themselves are taking ownership of what democracy means. It's happening across race, class, gender. It's very intersectional. And we've seen that currently, and we've seen that in the spaces that they're occupying, and they're owning it as a space of decolonial notions of democracy. So what they are criticizing and what we are going to be looking at in our panel is this triad of knowledge, education, and development. Because it's important to understand here that the idea of progress itself or democratic progress is predicated on these constructs between how these are developed within Western democracies. The Brazilian philosopher Paulo Freire deployed this and extended epistemic liberation by subjective and intersubjective reflective reflexive analysis into sustainable human liberation. The decolonial theorist Mignolo notes, to quote him, focusing on the coloniality of knowledge brings to the surface the entanglement and power differential of knowing and the knowledge in the colonies and former colonies in Western Europe. The central argument, then, of the book Border Thinking by Drynes and Saplucia is to understand how the authors conceptualize identity and belonging for diasporic youth that extend beyond national borders. A lot of the students right now in different countries are diasporic youth. They come from other countries, they have the hyphenated immigrant from second generations in the US, in Germany, and other places, and that's how they're identifying themselves. So the notion of what civic nationalism even looks like is changing. The first in this book of border thinking, is about the critical consciousness of young people growing up between nations and who we call diaspora youth. And the second is a methodological and conceptual argument about how we might better see, understand, and nurture this consciousness for transformative possibilities. First, the diaspora, young people's experiences of belonging and exclusion across multiple national contexts, gives them a critical perspective on national citizenship that rejects the binary thinking of either assimilation or alienation, either one national identity or another, for example. We argue in our panel, through our various case studies, that this critical perspective on nationalistic narratives lends itself to criticizing nationalistic narratives lends itself to active democratic citizenship in the sense of exploring diverse, intersectional ways of living and breathing democracy for more just and expansive forms of belonging, while also interrogating factors that pose obstacles to it for so many. So, what we are going to do, and I'm just going to conclude now, is in our panel and in our work, that hopefully we invite you to be part of, is hopefully make you all understand that looking at democracy in this form of empowering youth to become engaged from local perspective to the global perspective, make you understand that democracy is not a linear process. It's messy and requires continuous support and development. As in the essay, Decolonizing the Civic and Ethnic Binary, Megan Tinsley explained how the founding work of nationalism theory identity goes over overarching categories of nationalism, civic and ethnic. While the former is lauded as liberal, inclusive, and rational, the ethnic, the latter, is looked at as regressive, restrictive, and exclusionary. What we are going to do is, drawing on the work of such thinkers, decolonial thinkers, we're going to deconstruct those boundaries and look at the spaces where the other and the self in this nationalistic civic notion of diasporic identity comes together in a new way. To reiterate, then, our panelists, by actively engaging in an embodied pedagogy of positionality in their local and global spaces, offer an alternative decolonial methodological critique that provides students with tools to use the curriculum and the classroom as a site of social, political, ethnographic, and gendered inquiry. The overarching goal then becomes the creation of anti-racist decolonial pedagogies where both students, teachers, activists are systemically deconstructing their own views of how diversity and identity factors in relationship to each other, to themselves, and to their democracies. Consequently, as the scholar Ali Abdi states, if the function of democracy in education is to communicate human experience in terms of freedom, association, and liberty, then students and teachers can use creative pedagogical strategies of non-decoloniality to educate one another. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shireen, for this really, really broad overview of where we are currently and what civic education and democracy really needs. Our next presenter is going to talk a little bit more now about how we actually got to where we are and the role, for example, that nation states play into shaping curricula. So how did the idea of democracy and citizen education find its way into schools, and what does that mean for the 21st century? So Tamara, by the way, is just a postdoctoral researcher at the Yehuda Elkanah Center for Teaching with the Central European University in Vienna. Over to you, Tamara.
Thanks for that flattering introduction, Corinna. And thank you, Shireen, for giving us such a theoretically robust introduction. And my head is actually spinning a little bit right now. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be duplicating what you're saying, or if I'm going to be adding on, or even or sort of hopefully what I'm going to try to do is give everybody a little bit of an insight into what it means to actually challenge some of the narratives that we've inherited as Corinna says, through our very state-based concepts of civic education. And so what I wanted to begin with was just to think about and interrogate and put a little bit of pressure on that relationship between education and democracy. You'll see in my title, I've said that schools are not always our better angels. We're going to kind of unpack that through the next couple or through my time with you all, and discuss it maybe also in the Q&A. The first thing to note here is that education, just like any other sector, is a performance-driven industry. When we think about what performance means, this is actually putting pressure on children in K through 12, but then also on students in higher education to meet certain standards, to meet criteria, to fall within a kind of a normative, a space of norms. And to perform well. And all of this is monetized, and increasingly so. Education and higher ed are becoming businesses. And so this was something that we'll talk about a little bit when we look a little bit at the theory of critical pedagogy. But as I said, there's this assumption that really functioning educational institutions can be natural partners to democracies, that students there learn what it means to model active citizenship, to learn critical reasoning. And all of that is naturally possible, but we have to see it also in the context of where we are right now in terms of what education actually does and what its goals and aims are. The other thing to consider also is the way in which we metrify or the way in which we kind of quantify both the facilitation of teaching, how we teach and how we think about our teaching, and how we assess students as part of that sort of performance-driven model that I was telling you about. And it's quite easy, I think, when you have education sort of quantified in that way, to really put democracy into the curriculum, to make it just another kind of thing to learn. And in that sense, it doesn't become a kind of a mode of association. It doesn't become a practice, a lived practice. I think Shireen was talking about that a little bit, that democracy is something that is messy sometimes. And it's a lot easier, I think, when you want a school to succeed, to perform, to do well in numbers, to produce exceptional students, to just have it as a part of a curriculum and not really make it part of the way in which you interact, in which teachers and students interact with each other. One really practical thing to point out is that a lot of teachers really don't know how to deal with things that our students are facing. Shireen, you were just saying that so many students have backgrounds that are mixed. They come from various nation states. They have various identities. Oftentimes, their hearts are in one place, their feet are in another. There are a lot of things that are going on. Our digital worlds also put a lot of pressure onto young children. Children these days can, open up their social media and find photos that are disturbing from all around the world, that engage them at a certain level. And a lot of teachers really don't have the language, they don't have the training to deal with some of these topics, to talk to students about things that matter to them, to engage them. And in that sense, that can also often be a source of frustration and disappointment for students, turning them into what we've called our kind of young skeptics, making them a little bit hesitant also to engage, with their teachers in the classroom on things that really matter to them. And then finally, not to put all the pressure on the teachers, since I myself consider myself a teacher, and I think teaching is a noble profession. Sometimes teachers just find that they lack support within their schools, from their leadership, within their departments, if they're in higher education, to really create and foster inclusive environments. Inclusive teaching is naturally something that I think many of us care about, but it's not always the number one, it's not the number one consideration for a lot of schools. So if you could just switch to slide 2, Corinna. So some challenges that we have to kind of fostering, creating cultures of democracy and inclusion include, as I was saying, just this standardization, this push towards standardization, the way in which knowledge production is limited in that sense by sort of circumscribed outcomes, and then learning diversity, thinking about learning as a kind of active thing that maybe is ungraded, that doesn't have a kind of a performance at the end of it. That's one way in which schools face challenges when it comes to really fostering democratic cultures. The second thing to consider, and this is something that we just discussed, and my colleague is on the call too. I saw he and I co-teach a course on democratic and inclusive teaching to students and faculty all around the globe. One thing that we kind of discussed this week and that I wanted to include in our presentation for everybody today is a term called epistemic injustice. This is a way of thinking about how, and it comes from an article that was written in 2018 about especially how disabled people are excluded from knowledge production. This is an idea that not everybody really gets to be part of the discourse, that not everybody is taken seriously, that people, especially, I mean, in this case, disabled people, that their knowledge is not valued in the same way that the knowledge of able people is valued. How that happens at a kind of phenomenological basis, and what are the consequences of this exclusion. And then finally, we talked a lot about this, but profit-driven education. Education is a business like any other. And in that sense, in many schools are less now part of the public good and kind of becoming more a part of a market economy, as we see with a lot of privatization pushes. Can we go to slide 3? So, Shireen, you already talked about Paulo Freire. I've kind of referenced this idea of the banking system of education. Paulo Freire, as you may all know, he was a critical pedagogue from Brazil, working really with people, people who are peasants, rural workers, on literacy on a really large scale, developing experiments for education on a mass scale. And throughout his work and very sort of self-reflective work and critical work, he was developing alternative ways of thinking about how education and how teachers practice education. And what he criticized as the banking system of education was a kind of system in which teachers just deposit knowledge into their students like you would money into the bank, right? There are several metaphors that he has alongside this really powerful metaphor of the banking system, which is actually now more or less commonly used, I think, in critical pedagogy, or it's something that a lot of people have heard about or know about. But one thing to note here is that this banking system, it's not just a problem of knowledge transfer, but it's actually a problem of power. When you have a teacher who is depositing knowledge, who asserts an authority over a student, you have a kind of a relationship of hierarchy. And this is just something that is also easy to practice. It's much easier for a teacher who does have competence in their field and knows something about their subject to just come in and talk about that and to kind of deposit it. And in that sense, I think what is kind of easy, what is a habit, what is practice, what is part of already our kind of cultural muscle memory, this banking system is something that is hard to get rid of. And that's why the banking system of education is still something that we talk about today in 2024, many, many decades after Paulo Freire coined the term. Another thing that I wanted to point out, and this is something that we kind of talked about when we were in Salzburg, it was really interesting to me because and you'll see hopefully at the end, we had one phrase that summed up like 4 hours of talking and meeting with each other. But all of us had these different experiences with school that were in some ways, triggering, traumatic. Many of us had memories of schooling in which where we didn't feel as though we were empowered, where we definitely felt like we had no agency, and where we didn't feel that we could do much, as students, and felt very much part of a hierarchy. And schools are just in general sites of kind of intergenerational trauma. You might note or might just recall the fact that it was really only in the 1980s and 90s that many schools in the West stopped the practice of corporal punishment. So that's not very long ago, that teachers were beating students in school. That those could be our parents or our uncles and aunts at this point, if at least for my generation. So this is, in some ways, it's a very difficult kind of ask to have schools just naturally become our interlocutors with education when they have these histories that are not always so unproblematic. And leadership of schools, for various reasons, are not always aligned with community interests. I can't go into that too much, but I think many of you will probably have some experience or some familiarity with how your school or your university may not have always been working in the favor of the community surrounding it. Can we go to the next slide, Corinna? Finally, I have this little quote here this was, I was just looking for how relationship between the state and between schools, what kind of, how can we characterize that? And the first thing that I found, this reflects also a kind of US based approach, maybe that Shireen, you were also talking about. But of course, right now in the United States, there is just a lot of discussion about what certain parties are doing to our education. There is a very strategic attack right now on schools that are happening from the right wing, and this is one of the big problems that you have when the nation is one of the major stakeholders in education. This is something that was identified by the philosopher who really theorized everything you need to know about democracy and education, John Dewey, in 1916, right? So over 100 years ago, it was already put out there that there's a bit of a problem when the nation is more or less shaping the agendas of schools, of education, when different political parties have a major stake in that kind of education. And so I think it's easy just to note that educational institutions are really embedded in complex social relationships. The most powerful of these are represented by the state. Sometimes these can be dangerous influences. They can be nationalist or even bellicose influences, as John Dewey noted in 1916, which of course the World War I was going on. He was quite he was at a tragic moment, one of the most tragic moments in history, looking at the relationship between schools and education. Huge problem, and something that we have to sort out as we think both about the future of education, what it would actually mean to decolonize education or to reorient the state, that relationship between the state and education. Corinna, last slide, please. So I didn't want to leave us with that really on that negative note and to make us all sad about the future of education. I've been talking a lot now about some ways in which the schools are not our better angels. And I've already kind of, by laying out the problems identified, I hope some potential solutions or some ideas for how we can think about changing this. So on the one hand, we really must recognize that democracy is not just, like you said, Shireen, I'm just going to hold on to that, is something that's kind of messy. It's not always nice to be a teacher in a democratic classroom. Your students can talk back. They can tell you that they want you to be a better grader, a better facilitator. They might tell you things that surprise you. But democracy, what it really means to share power, that's difficult to realize. And it goes beyond just curriculum or culture. It is something that is active. It is something that is negotiated. I really think that we should put an emphasis on thinking about teachers. We often just sort of forget, I think teachers are both celebrated and neglected in an odd way. Teachers aren't, we know that teachers aren't paid nearly enough for the kind of work that they do. And at the same time, we expect so much from them, especially, if we want to make democracy or we want to put democracy in the front row of education, then teachers are the ones who are going to be really working on this. And that means that we should kind of train teachers. We should support them. We should support them in their methods we should support them to be more inclusive. We should support their passions. We should train them also. And training them would also mean to train them to be a little bit empathetic, to understand, to have some understanding of the complex identities and the complex relationships of our youth. And so I wanted to just put that out there. It's not hard to guess where I'm coming from. I kind of have a preference for critical pedagogical methods, when it comes to all of this. And so I would say that we need to embrace a kind of critical pedagogy when we think about what it means to encourage youth agency. And finally, fostering a culture of dialogue is just so important when we think about how to reshape our schools. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your questions and hopefully being able to answer some of them after we've wrapped up.
Thank you, Tamara. Thank God you ended on that slightly more positive note. I was really spiraling there for a second, thinking about how serious the challenge is, right? And how much work we have to do. And towards the end, you were talking a lot about the role that teachers are playing in all of this. And so that is the perfect segue for me to hand it over to Daniela Graf now. Daniela is a teacher with the Salzburg International School, SALIS. And so she's going to tell us a little bit more about exactly that, the role that teachers play in democratizing schools. So over to you, Daniela.
Thank you, Corinna. So the next 10 minutes will be very much based on my personal experiences locally. And I'm not going to talk so much about school, but about what I came to understand as democracy in a local grassroots activism movement, and what I learned there, because most of my learnings, my personal experiences with democracy, I had the feeling I learned outside of school. Then in a second step, I would like to come up with ideas and suggest some ideas with how we can take these learnings from outside school contexts, from grassroots activism into our schools, to create a more positive attitude towards democracy among our students. What really sparked, or what gave me the idea for this talk today, is that I, over and over again at school where I teach, I get some frustrated, critical comments about democracy by some of my students. And it's mainly after democratic decisions that have been taken at school. For example, after the election of the class representatives, where some students felt like they would never get their representatives because they're in a minority in this group. Or we also had an important vote in our student parliament last year, where then the losers, after the results of the vote was read out, they just left the building. And I think we can do better, and we have to do better. Democracy can do better than just being reduced in many minds of young people to, democracy is voting, it's majority votes where there's always losers and winners. So I'm mainly going to talk now about my experiences and learnings as a founding member of a food co-op in Salzburg, which we founded about 10 years ago as the first food co-op in Salzburg. And I'm going to highlight different aspects of the process of founding this food co-op that created learning experiences about myself in groups, about living and practicing democracy. And then, I would like to make some suggestions how we can use this, these learnings, these aspects in more formal educational contexts like schools. So I'm going to focus on 3 aspects. The first one is creating positive change in the world. The second one, co-creating, self-organizing as a group to reach a common goal. And thirdly, experimenting with methods and tools for collective decision-making. So this brings me to my first point on the next slide, Corinna, please. Creating positive change in the world. Maybe I have to first talk a little bit about what is a food co-op. The interest group Food Co-ops Austria states on their website that they are non-profit, self-managed communities that provide an infrastructure for the procurement and distribution of fair and sustainable products, mainly food, and all members of a food co-op must have the right to participate in decision-making. So these food co-ops come in all different sizes and shapes, from like small groups of friends, 10 to 15 members that are like collect the food products in a garage of a private home, or it reaches all the way to really big organizations with up to 50,000 members in the US. It's also not a new idea. It originated in the 1850s, movement had its ups and downs, but then in the early 2000s, it became more important again as people searched for alternatives for the prevailing food system. And so the change food co-ops now in the early 2000s want to make in the world is that their anonymity between producers and consumers is eliminated, that the production of food is more sustainable, more ecologically friendly and socially just. So I think democracy is also a strong civil society that wants to create positive change in the world, and we should also try to bring this into our schools. And at the end, I'm going to come back to this on how we could do this. My second point on the next slide is co-creating and self-organizing, and how this also makes sure that learning experiences are sustainable because they are of personal value for the learners. So when we started our food co-op, we started from scratch. We had just the idea. A friend of ours was involved in the movement in Vienna, and he gave us this idea. But we had to find a place for storing the food, collecting the food. We had to connect with local farmers. We had to manage how much we would order and so on. So many different things, but we could really, there were no rules. We could create all of that. And that was extremely powerful, an extremely empowering experience that we could make this change and we could create so much. And what also makes like being part of such a community that wants to create change in the world is I think that the feeling of being part of something bigger, something that one couldn't do on by themselves, but at the same time being heard as an individual with your individual ideas and needs. And this is also something we should bring more into schools. As well as the third point on the next slide, which is methods and tools for decision making that we tried out. We noticed quickly that simple majority voting did not bring the results that we wanted. Solutions or decisions that were made using this did not find great acceptance often, and not everyone had the feeling that everyone was heard. So we tried out lots of different tools. I just want to talk about one, and it's called systemic consensus. It was developed in Austria also in the early 2000s. And it measures a group's collective resistance to certain solutions. So for us, and that was in another food co-op, I moved places and then I joined another food co-op. And we had to decide if we wanted to be a vegan food co-op or if we wanted to have meat. It was like very heated discussions. And so we came up with different solutions for this problem. One was like having a separate fridge for the meat, having no meat, just ordering meat every 3 months. So different solutions. And then every member of our group voted for each solution what was their personal resistance to this solution or decision, and then we chose the decision that had the lowest resistance of the whole group, and that was such a nice experience. Personally, it helped getting to know the group, getting to know our common goals, and did not create any winners or losers, as I experience it often at school, like majority vote situations. Good, so to wrap this up, how can we bring this to our schools or more formal educational contexts? On my next slide, Corinna, please. From my point of view, what resembles the experiences that I could make in this founding of the food co-op process is project-based learning and groups. And these projects have to have an open outcome, be really open, so students can really self-create and have this like empowering aspects, can feel that empowerment. It should tackle real world issues, and often in schools we don't have to look far because there are so many conflicts everywhere. We can just, use that. And a high degree of self-organization. But that might, like this type of learning, teaching might not be possible in all contexts. Structural changes may be needed, timetable changes, curriculum changes, grading, and so on. But you can also, I argue, take smaller steps if these structural changes just make it impossible in your context to do like real project-based learning. Just reflect on the decision-making processes. There are so many decisions taken in school on a regular basis, and most of the time it has to be quick. It's a majority vote, and there are winners and losers, and in my experience at least, that creates often a negative view and frustration with democracy. Then also, my last point, in this whole project-based learning and decision-making, communication plays a key role. And at school, I have the experience that at my school, students, they really know how to make an argument, how to express their opinions. So they do a really great job at that. But often then it turns out that like the discussion itself is more about who has the better arguments than finding a common ground. And maybe in this project-based learning context, this could also change, or with other decision-making processes than majority votes. So I could go on and talk about this. I have many more ideas. Maybe we get there in our discussion at the end. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A at the end.
Thank you so much, Daniela, and how brilliant to have that example of exactly what you said about the real life example and how that can work. So now we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is going to tell us a little bit more about exactly how decolonizing education can work. Amisa is the founder and executive director of the Nivisha Foundation. And over to you, Amisa. Oh, I'm wondering if Amisa is actually with us, or if she maybe had to drop. Oh, she's just joining now. The internet is a little bit patchy, so let's give it another second.
Yeah, Misa's having connectivity issues, but she just came in.
Yeah. Amisa, can you go ahead, or shall we? Maybe we can move around again, and we'll get back to Amisa in a second. So then in that case, we're going straight to Linda, who is the CEO of YEP, the Youth Empowerment Participation organization in Vienna. And now I just need to find your slides, Linda. Here we go.
Yeah, here it is. Thank you, Corinna. I'm happy to be here with such great other women, and there was a lot which was already said, and I hope to give you a little bit more insight on the practical side of participation. Daniela started it with her example, and now I'm going to continue with another example. We are called YEP. It stands for Youth Empowerment and Participation. Our goal is to empower young people to lead social change, and we are creating new opportunities for young people to be active, to participate in decision-making processes. We are organized as a social business, so we also offer things. We offer participation as a service, PaaS. And our, motto or headline is always, if it's about them, don't do it without them. But yeah, you can also skip the if because it's about them. Don't do it without them. Everything that is about the future is about young people, so they should be included in the decision-making processes. Next slide. So here you can see a lot of different headlines about young people getting tired of democracy. Shireen already said so. It is basically about getting tired of politics, how it is now. It's not getting tired of democracy. We can maybe see some declines in the numbers of voters when it comes to young people, but not when it comes to being active. Next slide, please. We can see it here, how we define democracy. So when we work with young people, we often try to avoid saying democracy at first, because often they think it's the same as politics, and they feel a bit negative towards the words democracy. So at first, when we talk to young people, we often talk more about participation, about being active, having a say, also about activism and arts, about discussions and standing up for your rights, about co-creating something with others, cooperation, things like this. And they often have a more positive image of words like this. And then after having this introduction, you can try to frame the word democracy in a new way that is more appealing to them. We, as a social business, we conduct surveys, so participation processes, and we always have quantitative and qualitative data. Here I have two numbers that I find really interesting. Because 90% of young people already have concrete ideas how to improve things and make the world a better place. So that really shows that young people, it is important to them to do something, to make a positive change. And also they really have concrete ideas what to do and how to do that, because they are the experts of their living realities. They are the experts. They know what is needed in their communities, in their families, in their schools, etc. And the second number is 92% of young people want to be more included in decision-making processes that affect them. So they want to be included. Just as a background information, the first number comes from a survey in Austria, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein, a very, very small country in Europe. And the second number comes from Austrian young people. So just want to say that depending on the countries and the context, of course, these numbers can be different. Next slide, please. So how can we use this huge potential for positive, probably positive change? When we ask young people, what do you need in order to be more involved in decision making? The number one answer is that they want to have more discussions about current topics. So we really, really have to make sure that young people, doesn't matter where, in the classroom, within their families, with their friends, have safe spaces to discuss, to build an opinion, but also to have no fear to say their opinion and to exchange with others. And when we look at the other graph about how to help them implement their own ideas, the number one is funding for their projects, okay, of course, resources, but also the other answers are really interesting. A network that supports me, a community where I feel home, and a mindset that I truly can make a difference and that this is important. It is important to do so. And this is one point that I want to go a little bit deeper into detail. Next slide, please. For us, the biggest lever for positive change, but also for to convince skeptics, to convince young people that are less active to become active, is the impact. So we also asked young people what would help in order to become more active in the future. So what experiences do you want to make? And 95% of young people say that they would be more active and also politically involved in the future if they experience once, or they see once, that they really can make a difference, that they really can make an impact. So young people should feel that their voice matters and that they can change something. And this is the goal of our organization, but it also should be the goal of everyone. It doesn't matter if it's a teacher, if it's an organization that tries to strengthen democracy, to help young people to experience that their voice matters. Doesn't matter how small or big it is. And now we go into a concrete example. Oh, first the theory behind it. So if we do a project, we always look at 3 impact dimensions. So we have the individual impact. It's what I just said, it's that young people understand my voice matters, I can change something. Then we have the specific impact. So certain decisions become more inclusive. So certain political measures, but also projects are designed more to the needs of the target group. And the third dimension is the societal impact. It is just the mindset or the understanding of the society that people who are affected by decisions should be part of the decision-making processes. And these are the 3 dimensions that we always focus on when doing a project or something specific. When we look at the next slide, maybe you can, this is an example where we can see all these 3 dimensions. So this is the first time in history in Europe that the school curriculum was co-created by young people. We started this project last year in Austria. And until then, only education experts, academics, but also, I don't know, school directors and important people like this sat at the table and discussed what the school curriculum should look like. And last year, it was the first time that also students can have a say when it comes to their curriculum in school. So far, more than 70,000 young people actively participated. And we, as the organization that conducted this participation process, made sure that all 3 impact dimensions are addressed. So for the specific impact, we signed, or the Ministry of Education signed, an impact contract. So they had to sign that the voices of young people are really important to them, and we set specific measures so the voices or the opinions of the young people end up in the school curriculum. And they had to sign that. The second one was the societal impact. So we did lots of media work where young people are in the front of the work to show the society it is possible and it is good that young people are part of these decision-making processes. And the third was the individual impact. So we worked a lot with school classes, with teachers. And here you can see on the right side, that was the how do you say, like we handed over the report, the results of the participation process to the Minister of Education. And of course, you can only see a small group of young people who handed it over. So for them, it was, of course, a good moment and empowerment. But we wanted to make sure that for every single one who participated, for all the 70,000 young people, they have this special moment that they feel that their voice is heard. So we made some impact packages with a comic that showed the process, that showed the results, that showed the impact. We sent it back to the teachers so they can put it in their classrooms. And all the young people who participated can see, oh, wow, my voice was heard by the Minister of Education. So really thinking about the last step to bring the impact back to the young people so they can feel that their voice matters. And I think that's it. I mean, I could say so much more, but I think my time is over now, and I'm really looking forward to the part of Civica. So I will give it back to Corinna now, and of course, I'm happy to answer all your questions in the end.
Thank you so much, Linda. Yes, please keep the questions coming in the chat. I'm now slightly confused. I'm handing it over to Amisa now.
No, to
tell us-
Shivika.
To Shivika.
Sorry.
I'm handing it over to Shivika. So much happening in the background here, guys. So I'm handing it over to Shivika for the next presentation. Over to you, Shivika.
Thank you. And thank you, all of you, for staying with us for the last hour and listening to all of us. We're really looking forward to having a discussion. As you can see, we're a panel full of women. So, of course, we feel passionately about gender in general. But my work focuses on girls and women in India. And I just wanted to share a couple of figures and stats with you before I talk to you a little bit more about the work that we've been doing in India over the past couple of years. So if you can see these numbers on the screen, only 15 countries in the world have a woman head of state, and 16 countries have women as a head of government. And it would take 130 years for us to reach gender equality at the highest positions of power. Interestingly, last year in 2023, UNDP released their Gender Social Norms Index, a report called Breaking Down the Biases, which quantifies biases against women. And the report actually said that 9 out of 10 men and women hold biases against women. So it's not just men that hold biases against women, right? And with nearly half of the world's people believing that men make better political leaders than women. So just with that, I will switch gears a little bit, because Linda did say that they don't talk about democracy in terms of politics. We, on the other hand, do talk about politics specifically. So if you can go on to the next slide, Corinna. Thank you. As you probably all experience, politics in India is seen as a dirty word, and a lot of young people associate it with corruption, call it confusing, complicated. And we did a couple of studies over the past couple of years, which I'll share with you. And across the world, politics is seen as a man's world. It's associated with patriarchy in many parts of the world, but especially in India. So this is a statistic that you can see on the screen, where most young people basically thought politics was corrupt or complicated or dirty. And you'd see more girls associate politics with negative terms as compared to boys that took the survey. And you see a quote over there from one of our survey respondents, which I thought was really interesting, where it just shows the kind of biases that come with the field. So if you can go on to the next slide, where I'll share a few of our responses that we got. So in 2023, Kuvira partnered with researchers from UCLA to understand what young people think of politics and whether there was a difference between how young girls and boys perceive politics. And the reason I say girls and boys is because we do not have a statistically significant figure for other genders. We did ask for that, but we don't have stats for that. And interestingly, as you will see, when we asked them whether they were interested in politics, actually we saw that girls said 21% of them said they were very interested, compared to almost 40% of boys, 39.2%, which is almost double of boys said that they were interested in politics. And interestingly, when we digged a little deeper, we saw that young girls thought that they had perceived to have had lesser opportunities for them to engage with politics, whereas boys did not feel like that. So there are several reasons for this. And one of the things our study found out was it's a term called gendered political socialization, which basically means that girls are socialized into believing that politics is not a field for them, and they feel like there are limitations for them to enter politics. Whereas boys, on the other hand, are encouraged to engage with politics or have conversations about politics. And this is mostly because of how media and society portrays politics, right? So we saw that in our study as well. If you go on to the next slide. And this is also really interesting. So if you see this graph on the slide, you see at age 14, both girls and boys are similarly less engaged with politics, but the older they get, boys' interest accelerates significantly, whereas for young girls, it does not accelerate that much. So clearly something's happening between the ages of 14 to 22 that is changing the way young people think and associate themselves with politics. And that's the age group in which we want to work. And that's the age group in which we're talking about interventions as to why is it that different genders associate with politics differently. We are trying to do interventions in this age group where we work with young girls from the ages of 14 to 20 so that they are more engaged in politics and find opportunities to learn more and lead political and civic discourse as well. So if you move on to the next slide. So what can we do about it, right? We saw that other co-panelists spoke about different recommendations and the amazing work that they're doing across different fields. Interestingly, our study found that parents actually influence their children a lot, which was a surprise to me because I thought that peer groups or media would influence young people a lot more than their parents would. So if we found out that if a parent speaks to their daughter about politics, the less she feels that it's hard for women to be successful in politics, right? So parents play a key role, and they should start having conversations about democracy, politics, to their children at a young age so that it's dinner table conversation and they feel like they can make a difference and they should be involved in it. The second one is basically examples that my co-panelists have already shared. How can we have opportunities for students to get involved in civic action and local governance? And when they feel like they can make a difference, they will actually want to engage with more. Right now, you see a lot of youth across the world, especially in urban India, are very apathetic to the political situation around us because they just feel like they have no power, they have no say. But what can we do so that they feel like they can participate and they can make a difference? And Linda gave a great example earlier. The last one is also just how media portrays politics and democratic issues. Media also has a really important role to play. I spoke to a bunch of different parents while doing the study, and a lot of them said that they don't want to speak to their children about politics because of how badly media covers political issues, right? So many countries are going into election this year. Media is going to play such a big role over the next 10 to 12 months, and they can actually have a positive impact by the way they talk about democratic processes and politics, and maybe young people feel like there's more hope and want to engage more if media shows a positive portrayal. But that's mostly what I wanted to talk about. Yeah, and I'm done. Our details are on the slide, but I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. Please reach out.
Thank you, Shavika, and such amazing work that you guys are doing with Kuvira. Before we open it up for questions, we have one final presentation from Amisa now, who is going to tell us a little bit more about the role or the importance that decolonizing education plays and what needs to happen around that. So over to you, Amisa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amisa. I hope you can hear me well. I'm really sorry, I'm not in Kenya, I'm in Tanzania, so I have been experiencing a little bit of internet connectivity. Yeah, so I just wanted to touch a little bit of decolonization. My work mainly or strongly talks about decolonization in all its aspects. Before we go to my point, I just wanted for us to understand a little bit of what decolonization actually means. So decolonization, especially for us who are in the global south, is the prospect of having colonized. And as much as we had freed ourselves or sort of liberated ourselves, we still have neo-colonization, whereby most of the things, or most of, especially when it comes to education, most of curriculum, most of the thinking, most of the learning have been just imposed from our colonizers and just been imparted on us. So it is a whole aspect of colonizing everything, from education to the government, to different kind of systems, to make sure that as much as we are talking about democracy, we are also making sure that we are not carrying what has been harming us before, but we are more of trying to figure out how can we move forward without the roots that were holding us. So I run Nivisha Foundation, and Nivisha Foundation is a community-based organization in Kenya that focuses on community-based interventions and cultural sensitive interventions, because most of the time, even when it comes to education, and Nivisha focuses on a lot, we find that in mental health, we borrow the conventional Western approach of mental health instead of finding the community-based approach of mental health. And that is that there is a lot of resistance when you come to the community and say that this is what I want to teach, this is what I want to impact knowledge on, because people focus on making sure that our programs have unique cultural content. And coming from different communities in Kenya, we have around 48 ethnic tribes. So we make sure that as much as we can, we are incorporating all the ethnic tribes, people who are vulnerable and marginalized, so that they can fit in the context. The other aspect that has been, when you're talking about mock aspect of youth, we find that I'm using a lot of Kenyan context. We find that a lot of the time when you're speaking about youth, you're speaking at a point of this youth are the people who are supposed to, they're the future leaders. But in essence, when we say that they're future leaders, we are actively not involving them in major decision-making process. So we are just sidelining them and making decisions for them in the hope that they'll be future leaders. So how can we make sure that there's an urgency in making sure that a lot of youth are actually involved in decisions that involves them? And democracy, the definition of democracy is for the people and by the people. So when we are talking about decolonizing democracy for youth, we need to make sure that it is for the youth, by the youth, and with the youth from their local cultural context, so that we don't keep on like imposing or infringing some of the things that they're working on. The other aspect when you're coming to the decolonizing of democracy is working on how to navigate the challenges in civic education. And that's an aspect whereby in most of the time we see traditional education that has come with colonization, we see it as something harmful instead of something very, very helpful to the community that you're working with. So the Western notion of education is seen as superior compared to the traditional notion. So how can we also, by incorporating visual example, how can we create spaces for open dialogue? One thing that we are doing at Nivisha Foundation is we work with the youth when it comes to these matters, and we use channels where youth interact a lot. So for instance, a good example is that we have community radio stations whereby use local languages, slang, and local context that affects them, to just have discussion, engagements, and open discussion. And that is whereby we start actually relearning and learning new things about ourselves in the prospect of education, and also democracy in the long.
Thank you, Amisa. That was great, and a really sorry.
I was saying next I'm finalizing. I'm not going deep because I am aware of also the time.
Sorry, next slide then.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll just touch on these 2 points and give it back to the quick question and answer. One thing that I'm really interested on in intersectionality of democracy in education. And I know we're talking about the pedagogy of different curriculums and learnings and whatnot, but one thing that has really impacted at our work that we do at the grassroots levels, at the community level, is the intersectionality of how can we bring youth or young people or the people that you're working with from different groups, background, and city economic factors to come together. I personally come from a historically ethnically marginalized community in Kenya, and so long we have not been included as part of the main things that I've been working. So I have been really intentional in making sure that we have comprehensive understanding of curriculum that includes everybody, and in the essence that is democracy, because you cannot, if it is something for us, you have to include us to make it happen. And then finally, I'll stop at 5, decolonizing democracy in education. And this is what I've been talking about, like it's about how can we remove how can we deconstruct traditional Eurocentric and Western views of democracy and replace them with inclusive perspective. Because even when we see democracy, we as Africans, especially or people from the global South, are most of the time told to borrow ideologies from different Eurocentric or Western ideologies, yet it hasn't worked in those countries. So how is it expected to work in things? So it is also actually questioning the essence of democracy itself, and that is where we begin with the prospect of decolonizing and making people at the grassroots to hear their voice and to define what we want to learn, because they are also part of the whole decolonization thing, because it started with them, and in order to decolonize, we have to also begin with them in the process. So back to you, Corinne. Yeah.
Thank you, Amisa, and sorry for the interruption. I wasn't sure if you were going to go to your next slides. So given that we have really only some limited time left, I know we've had a couple of really good questions in the chat. The first one from Yanelia, and I hope I'm not butchering that name all too much, which was around re-educating teachers, really. So Yanelia, you were speaking about how we often teach in a way we were taught, and for some teachers that is going all quite well, and some are willing to relearn, but others may be a little more reluctant. So I think your question really was about how can we re-educate teachers to better support their students?
I'm happy to, unless if she wants to add, I read the question and I have an answer for her. Are you still on the call, Emilia?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great, or Yanelia, sorry.
Yeah,
Did
it's
you want-
Janalia. But...
Oh, Janalia. Okay, go ahead. Did you want to add anything to your question?
No, that was basically what I was trying to ask.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking about I felt like it was directed towards me because I talked a lot about teachers and training, and I absolutely see where you're coming from. It's true that a lot of people, I mean, older generations of teachers very much believe in the efficacy of their methods or the ethics of their assessment, let's say, you know, the grades mean something. You know, you're not going to really get them to embrace a Paulo Freire type critical pedagogy. But I was thinking actually along the lines of what Linda talks about in her youth model, sort of the steps of engagement and the different ways in which you can target and incentivize change among youth, that for people who are quite skeptical or people who are quite sort of off the grid, it's difficult to just bring them in, but there are ways in which you can activate different sort of mechanisms of change among young people so that you radicalize the people in the middle to then recruit the people at the end. That's something that you could think about also in a, in relation to teachers, right? Like that for the teachers, the older teachers who are very much reluctant to give up their methods, you could have a kind of, first of all, you can incentivize them, you can bring them to a workshop with cookies or whatever, but you could also get, the people in the middle, you can radicalize them and get them to kind of bring them into the fold a little bit. So do you see what I'm saying? Like a kind of soft pressure type thing, right? Not like a training that says everything you've been taught is wrong and you need to relearn, how to teach, but making sure that they're actively being kind of recruited into new communities of teaching that emphasize alternative ways of, really having these important conversations with young people.
Can I add something? I just completely agree with you, Tamara, and I love this idea of incentivizing things, like exactly what we do with young people, setting different incentives for them to be active. So there are you can, I don't know, give them money, you can give them time, you can give them attention, you can give them a stage where they can present something, and it's the same for teachers. So often more conservative teachers, they love if you have materials for them, and they don't really have to do much to create a very good lesson for their students. So often we would give like teacher toolkits to teachers, and especially the more conservative teachers, they really like it because then they have everything they need to do a lesson, but they don't really have to get a lot of new knowledge or skills to do it because we give them everything. So I think exactly what Tamara said, different incentives and just think about their motivation, what they need.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to add to that. That's a great question. And actually, part of the work I do is professional development with teachers and parents in different school districts and throughout New York State. This is where I'm at, and also other states and countries. And the reason this is needed, and I think I find it important, is because of the question that you posed us. Because I think a lot of times the teacher educator who's still teaching pre-service and in-service teachers, and all of you are on my Zoom right now, some of my students, you can agree with me that even apologies, this is the background of Manhattan noise. I'll let that go. So we have our own biases when we come into the classroom. And the question I always ask is, using what Linda and Tamara have said, I also create tools for our teachers to start understanding and reflecting their own biases, and parents too. It's not just teachers, it's also parents and how we think. So that's why I think framing this discourse within a decolonial perspective is so important, because then we're rethinking. The teachers are rethinking their relationship to knowledge, their relationship to power, and the relationship to how they are facilitating that knowledge in their classroom in a way that is inclusive, intersectional, and diverse. And they're aware of their own limitations in doing that. So that's very important. That's a great question, because I spend my whole semester just talking about that. Thank you very much.
If we have time, I think I could also throw my 2 cents in answering this question. I've been teaching now at the same state high school in Austria for about 10 years. And I've like a couple ideas about this question. My first idea would be like, you have to kind of be aware like where you put your energy in and where it has the most effect. Like if you only have a certain amount of energy to create change, and why target like this 1 or 2 teachers that are stuck in their old ways and won't change? Why not put your energy somewhere else if that's so? Then also, like I think if there was a bit more collaboration between teachers at schools, ideas could spread, right? You would work together more with other colleagues. They have their own ways, you have your own ways, and it might create like a change at a school level. And then also, I don't know if it should be the goal to like get rid of all diversity also in the staff body and teacher body. So just learning also to live with the diversity of different teaching styles and approaches. It's also democratic in a way.
Thank you, everyone. I would love to close with one final question from my end, just because we're running out of time. And that is really what's next? So if each of you could just give me in like 1 or 2 sentences, where are you going to be taking this work and how can people get involved? Basically, what is next? How can people take action? And maybe I can go in order. So Shireen goes first.
Thank you so much. We have, on my part, there's so many things we're trying to do, but one is a toolkit of our own case studies, and we are going to open it up. There's going to be a CFP for you all, those of you who want to submit can, to really talk about how globally and locally some of what we're doing shows itself in the classroom and mostly outside the classroom. So that on my end. Thank you.
Tamara.
Hi, yeah, this is our goal is to create really accessible material for teachers, but also for people working with young people to have these conversations, these important conversations. We want to do that in a form of a digital reader. And we have a note about how to contact us for that. That'll come at the end. So, yeah.
And next for me, Linda.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, everything what Shireen and Tamara said, we are continuing our work as a very diverse and international group, and finding ways or approaches to how to tackle this skepticism, and yeah, also how to reframe democracy. And maybe that's also my call to action for everyone thinking about reframing democracy, or maybe also finding other words that describe what we mean as democracy. So it's not just about voting every 4 years. It's more a cultural, a culture of democracy that we need to strengthen and we need to foster. And every one of us can contribute to this goal.
Then Daniela.
Yeah, start following us, keep following us, and maybe if you're working in an educational context, try to be creative and find like small steps you can take if you can't like change everything at once.
Shavika and then Amisa.
Thanks. Thank you all for listening. One of the things we've been working on is to see how we can make democracy in democratic terms more accessible, because we may mean something, but someone else may mean something completely different with different words. So actually, today we've released, Kuvira has released a democracy and gender lexicon, and we're hoping to do this across countries and maybe have some collaborative way of doing this across all the countries that we work in. It's India's Republic Day today also, so it's very symbolic for us that I am on this panel and talking about democracy, and we've also shared the lexicon. So hopefully we'll do a more collaborative version of this, which is more international. The one we have right now is very focused to India. So
Amisa.
I don't think she's on the call. Yeah.
I think her internet dropped out.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then it is up to me to close this meeting, close this session. Thank you so much for to everyone who joined. Yes, sorry.
Can we just? I'm sorry. We have a call to action, right?
Please go ahead.
Okay, great.
I thought this was our call to action.
No,
you guys' call to action.
Yeah, so you'll see, sorry, I posted the email into the chat. We wanted to show you a picture of a whiteboard where we had, after 4 hours of conversation, just written the word decolonize. So that was our call to action to you. That was our sort of, that's how we would sum up kind of the work that we're doing. But basically, please be in touch with us at SGS Skeptics, British spelling, @gmail.com. And just let us know about your interest in getting, we want to put you onto a listserv basically so that we can update you with information about where we are with our reader. That's it. So SGS Skeptics, British spelling with a C @gmail.com.
And Tamara has put exactly that email in the chat earlier. So be in touch with the group through that. Thank you so much to all of you, to the speakers, to the people who joined. Thank you so much to the Learning Planet Festival for letting us host this session as part of their many sessions. And I hope we'll see each other very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you. And thank you, Corinna, for the great moderation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.